Critical Investment Challenges. She is a geopolitical strategist and the founder of Fordham Global Foresight. Tina, great to have you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you talk of accepting the world as it is rather than how we would like it to be. I mean, what are, do you think, the biggest blind spots where perhaps we are collectively being a bit too optimistic?
Well, I mean, first of all, since Putin's invasion or second invasion of Ukraine, February 24th of last year, I think it's forced a rethink on many of the ideas that investors assumed were held by world leaders. First of all, that everybody's interested in economic growth and stability. Turns out power is still the main driver, and Putin is not the only world leader who's pursuing an agenda that's based on projecting geopolitical power.
I think that's interesting. Might you want to elaborate on a few other leaders that you think right now are prioritizing power over economic growth?
Well, I think for China, the presumption is that economic power and geopolitical power are intertwined. This is certainly how the U.S. has approached things. But what I mean to say is that investors assume the primacy of the economy over power dynamics, and that's not necessarily the case. So former ambassador to Russia was saying earlier that when he spoke to the heads of U.S. multinationals working in Russia, this is certainly true of investors that I was talking to at the time, they said Putin will never invade. It would be bad for the economy. Putin was warned that Russia would be isolated. All of those things have happened, and yet none of it deterred Putin from taking that step. President Xi Jinping in China has been very clear about his vision of reunifying with Taiwan. We should really take him at face value there, that it's a question of when and not if. And yet, still for business people and market participants, the assumption is that the leaders won't take risks if it undermines their economy. They're hoping to do both.
And so for business leaders and investors, the theme, I think, for 2023 is a term you say, firewalking. Explain to me what exactly firewalking is, because when I hear that, I think of, I don't know, spiritual gurus walking over coal. So what exactly do you mean, and what are the practical applications of that?
Well, that's exactly what I mean. It is very much drawing upon that idea of people who are able to walk over hot coals without without getting burned. And what I'm really trying to communicate is that we can't swerve geopolitical risk in the decade ahead, to be frank. We're going to have to learn to walk through the fire. It's actually a quote from the American poet Charles Bukowski, who said, "What matters most is how well we do it." And I think this is what investors need to do. Instead of being in denial, projecting our own values, we need to get used to the fact that we've got a number of hot spots, and also we've underinvested, quite frankly, in whether it's diplomacy or our own understanding about the way the world works.
Looking ahead to 2024, there are several significant elections. We have, of course, our elections here in the U.S., but we also have India, Russia, Ukraine, and the U.K. I'm curious, though, how significant do you think the division that we're currently watching in Washington will ultimately be? I mean, we are used to certainly seeing a certain level of political gridlock between the two parties, but seeing this level of division within one party does seem to be quite rare. How significant do you think that is, if at all?
Well, it's hugely significant. I mean, it is a blessing, really, that given all the turmoil that we're talking about, as well as the possibility of a recession and other economic policy issues, that in 2023, we don't have very many systemically significant elections. Every time a U.S. election comes around, people like me say, well, this is the most important U.S. election of our lifetimes. Well, guess what? We're going to be saying that again, because so much is at stake. I can tell you from where I am in London, talking to mainly non-US investors, though, that the world breathed a massive sigh of relief after US midterms, not especially because Democrats did better than expected, but because the election deniers and more extreme candidates didn't do well. So the idea that U.S. institutions' respect for the Constitution remains is of enormous importance, but also, given how high the stakes are, who's in the White House really matters. Most people are genuinely mystified by U.S. politics at the moment. And so who ends up winning the Republican primary, whether Biden announces he's going to run again, these will be hugely important questions, as well as Americans' engagement in the world. U.S. leadership is important, given the extent of the geopolitical turmoil that we have.
Yeah. As you point out, lots of questions ahead, and also lots of questions even today, such as who will lead the House of Representatives here in the U.S. Tina Fordham, great to have you. Thank you. She is the head of Fordham Global Foresight.